Welcome everyone to another DesignOps Aligned podcast. I am welcomed by a very special guest by the name of Freya Finnerty. I came across Freya because she posts a lot about the agile way of working, and she's an would I say agile coach or an agile specialist? What would you?
I mean, do you know what? I think the term agile coach is so misused. So just say agile
Yeah,
specialist,
yeah,
agile unicorn, whatever you want to, Naz,
yeah.
whatever it means to you.
No, I mean, I think I came across your profile because you do show a lot of agile. How can I put this? The benefits of using agile in the company, and I would label it as an agile specialist. So, I'm really glad you come on the show. Freya, do you want to give an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Naz. So I suppose by trade, I'm an agile coach, but I've worn many hats, Scrum Master, delivery specialist, I suppose continuous improvement coach. I mean, my passion is working with people. I work for a digital transformation consultancy, and I go in and help organizations when they're just thinking about business agility and what that could mean for them and helping
Mhm.
them shape that path. But I also go in when there's organizations that have been doing it for some time and it's just not working. It's gone a bit stale. And sometimes I go in, with really small teams where they're like, look, we haven't got any agile capability. Can you come in and sort of help grow our internal capability so we know what's best practice? So I kind of get involved at all levels, really.
Oh, brilliant! And yeah, I'm gonna dive straight into it,
Go
Freya.
for it. Go for it, Naz.
Think with an agile, okay, so somebody who's coming in as an agile specialist, and you know, even a digital transformation agency going into companies, and generally agile coaches, in my opinion, go through this. The hardest thing I've seen, and and I'm sorry, let me take two steps back. We also feel the same way as a design ops agency going in and trying to change stuff. And I wanted to get your 2 cents on what is the hardest thing when you're trying to bring in a methodology to help businesses, from your perspective?
I think the hardest thing is, when you're often asked to, you're brought in, and it's usually brought in by, someone fairly senior, and then you're introduced to the teams, and they're like, well, why are we doing this? And I suppose there's been this step that's been missed where, perhaps they've been brought on a journey, say, this is why we're wanting to change, this is the need, why we need to shift and how we're working. And so you then get this pattern where it seems like you as the consultant, this is your organization's view rather than, trying to make something for them. And that kind of understanding or miscommunication, it kind of sets you off on a back foot, really, because people are like, well, who are you, really? So I think that's kind of the hardest part. Like, how can you if you get the introduction right, when you do meet with the teams, it's just a much more smoother process. But if I'm honest, it rarely happens.
In my experience, I have seen a lot of agile coaches come into companies where they don't last long because, and there's two things. One thing is that they come in to try to bring a methodology or a framework where it's too, how should I say, they're too rigid, and they're not open to trying out new ideas. That's one where I've seen a lot of agile coaches fail. And the second thing, they try to do too much change in one go. Now, what would you say to people? Because a lot of people are trying to find frameworks to make themselves more sustainable, deliver faster. What would you say to people who want to adapt a new framework, or for agile coaches wanting to come into a company to bring a framework? What's the best advice you would give to them for this? I know it's a long question, but it's one
Yeah.
of the things I wanted to get your 2 cents on.
Yeah, it's a great question, Az. I think there's a couple of things. I think, thinking about the size of an organization, I think that plays a big part. And I've worked at, really large organizations, and I've worked at, smaller startups. And I think, when you go into, a smaller organization, a smaller startup, it's kind of easier, I suppose, with that change because maybe the teams are more empowered to actually, make a change. And you as that, agile coach or, delivery manager, consultant, you've got, I suppose, much more room and I suppose autonomy to do that. But then when you go into a large organization, you are
Mhm.
part of a very big system. And unless you're tapped in and plugged into those, other teams and, it's very difficult to make that change impactful, and also to get the teams behind it, because they're thinking about their day-to-day jobs, what they're doing, and then it can just seem like an added extra thing that's just getting in their way of doing what they love doing, which is usually building products or speaking to the customer, delivering value. So I think that's the hard part. And I think as any coach, you need to have a thick skin, but you need to kind of really get to think about, okay, well, what is this client? What do they need? And you've got to go in and listen. You can't just go straight in and go, right, here we go. I've got this awesome framework. It worked at this other place. Let's just roll it out. And, some consultants may do that, but, eventually it will just unravel. So you have to be prepared, I think, to adapt and shift a bit.
See, this is where I'm going to tie into what you just said at the last bit. What I have noticed a lot when agile coaches come in, or generally when a framework comes in, is that people are reluctant to do the admin work. And that's what I noticed with the agile framework. There's a lot of admin work. What's your 2 cents on that?
So when you say admin work, are you talking about the J word? Are you talking about Jira, Naz?
I'm talking about Jira.
I'm
talking about Jira.
I totally get you. I hear that every day. But I think that the reason why people see it as an overhead or admin is because they haven't had the bit beforehand where thinking around, well, this is a tool. How can this help us achieve, agility, or where we're trying to get to, or this improvement? And so they don't see the connection. So it is just seen as another extra tool of where they've got to add things to. But if you're really, if you've introduced it in the right way, where you've had some time with the teams, you've done some coaching with them, you're trying to explain around, collaboration, working together, then, that becomes less of a chore. But a lot of the time we don't have that luxury. So it is tricky. How can you say it's not like extra admin, and it's actually a value added task that's actually helping them to uncover, are they delivering the right thing in the right way?
But see, this is also, and I just spoke to somebody about this just recently. One thing I've noticed, and especially about Agile in general, and I think it's great. I personally like it. I'm an analytical person by trade. What I find is that some of the metrics that do come out from bringing in the frameworks can sometimes detriment the framework in general.
Yeah.
Because I have seen a lot of agile coaches who have used metrics or whatever they're studying or whatever they're getting from bringing in the framework to then either diminish their framework, saying, hey, we're not performing good, or we are taking longer to deliver, or X, Y, Z. Now, what's your 2 cents about using the metrics you get from the Agile framework to really help teams?
Yeah, because I think that's a misconception. When I first became a Scrum Master, I was working at a large organization, and we're all very much face to face. Yes, we had Jira, but it wasn't the be all and end all. We had physical boards with physical post-its. And yes, we could track things, we could write things on the board. And what was on that board was what was meaningful for the team. And we would sit there, we would have conversations, and we would be tracking what was helpful to them. And then, our CEO, if he walked past, he could have a look, anyone. It was transparent for everybody. But what we see, I think now, is that, most teams are remote a lot of the time, or we're hybrid. And so there's much more focus on the tools and, I suppose the metrics side, where we're not really thinking about the metrics that are helpful for the team. We're thinking, what message is it, helping, are we comparing teams, and that's where you start to get these metrics where, actually that they're kind of meaningless, if one team, completes that many stories and another team completes that many stories, well, great, but doesn't really mean anything. But this misconception around, I think, metrics is quite damaging for teams. And then they kind of feel that they're on this conveyor belt of just, having to track everything. They get to the end of the sprint and they're like, oh gosh, we've completed less than last time, but that team's done that. And then they feel like they're being watched and observed. Yeah. And, that's not the environment you want if you want innovation or creativity, or, people to really take ownership of their working practices. So, I mean, I struggle with this with teams all the time, but most of the time it's not the teams, it's those that sit around the team that feel that they have to have these metrics, and it's gonna, it's important for them, and that's the class, the gold star, they're all agile because they're completing that many story points. So I think it's an education piece, and you have to start, I think, at that senior level to think around, okay, well, what do you need to, what do you want the teams to be telling you, and how can we get, how can we facilitate that? But bring the teams along with you, so that they're part of that. I suppose metric tracking is not something that is being done to them; they're part of it.
Nice. There's so much for me to dissect just from that answer, but I wanna touch base. I think one of the key things I have struggled, in my past career, was when I brought in the Agile methodology or Scrum methodology, you name it, to a team, that story point competitiveness comes into play. Because as you just mentioned, it happens on the granular level where you bring in a framework and or you bring in story points, just to use that as an example. And I've seen team members say, hey, I feel I've not been contributing enough because that other team member is doing more story points than I am. And I think it comes from a natural feeling that, my numbers are not matching up to somebody else's numbers, and I feel I'm not contributing to the team. But, I try to show them that it's not about the numbers game, that you do more than this. It's more the case of understanding what is your capability in a sprint to then plan for better stories or better estimations, or even just better planning of work in general, because then what is your velocity. And how have you dealt with something like that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and I don't know if there's any right answer to that, but I think a lot of the time, if you've got a purely cross-functional team, you will have some people that I suppose, when they're sizing things, that they may be more comfortable with something than others. But in a cross-functional team, anyone could pick up a story and start working on it, right? And then you might see that it might take somebody a bit longer, but then how valuable is that? That somebody who didn't, perhaps they're slightly out of their comfort zone, they're learning something new, and that's making the team stronger. So that's actually, for me, that's a positive. But it's not great when you get in that kind of, I suppose, competitive state. I worked at an organization where I had, there was a developer who was actually, taking work home and doing it over the weekend, was like, hey, I've done it all, and again, it was that whole gamification thing, because, from their leadership team, it was about the amount that you completed. But, where's the value in that if someone's working on something in isolation? You missed all the great minds and conversation and check-in that you'd have in with the rest of the team. So for me as a coach, that's a big flag.
Massive.
Yeah, big red flag.
Massive. I've heard of people doing that, to be honest, where they've been in the element to do something on their own, and then when it comes into kind of the sprints, it's just like, yeah, I've done what I needed to do, I've performed, here's my numbers. And I love that comment that you just made, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong with this one. I think Agile, or the benefits of Agile, is that cross-functional team aspect where anyone can pick up anyone's stories. It's not about the numbers and what you deliver. I personally believe that when you have a great Agile team, anyone, you don't have to have a dedicated you should. The T-shaped methodology we can delve into another time, but I believe that anyone who can pick up stories, who knows what to do within that kind of skill set, researchers, designers, developers, I think the benefit is that whenever anyone can pick up teams, that's when Agile really, really works. Not like, hey, we're delivering 100 points every single sprint, or we now delivering 140 points. What's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, you get a certain energy around that when you've got a team that really feel like that they've got each other's backs, and that they can pick something up and share that knowledge. I think it's amazing. I worked at a retailer, and we were set up like that, and it was super exciting, to think that you'd have developers pairing with each other or trying to get really solve a problem, rather than people just owning different sections. But I think the big thing around, the whole story point things is, the whole point around it is to get a conversation out of the team to, have that inspection and challenging each other. So if someone's saying, hey, I think this is an 8, and someone else is saying, hey, I think this is, a 2 or whatever, it's not really about the numbers. It's about what comes out of that conversation and, how is that going to change, the value that they're delivering or the path or the route that they may take. So again, it's like, how can we facilitate that and put the value on that rather than, these kind of vanity metrics?
Yeah, no, it's such a, how should you say, it's such a hard task when, and, being an agile coach and, digital transformation consultant, it's such a hard thing to really sell the value of story points without that competitive edge on top. So I'm really glad you brought that one up. Freya, I'm going to take another stab at another thing which I've noticed, and it's something that we also struggle with when we come in as consultants anyway. One of the things is that I've noticed is that certain, and I'll check with legal if we can keep this one in, yeah. But one thing I've noticed is that companies would bring, let's say they bring in certain consultants to help in. We're not going to put DesignOps into the mix into it, but say they bring in certain agile coaches and scrum masters. And what I have seen or spoken to people in the market is these agile coaches will come in and, how should I say, not pitch, but, do their assessment of what needs to be changed. But the consultant, or sorry, the client doesn't really listen to this sort of stuff. Have you come across this in your experience?
Yes, I have come across that. It's really hard, I think. Prior to being a consultant, I was always an in-house coach, and I suppose we always say that we're there to try and hold a mirror up to the organization and really challenge, and that is hard. If you're an in-house coach, or because you're then part of the system yourself. But then as a consultant, you're going in and you feel like you've got that extra kind of confidence to challenge, and you should, because let's be honest here, organizations are paying you a lot of money. But one thing I do see is that particularly with agile, is that sometimes they just want a quick fix, and you're telling them something and you're giving them your concerns, or you're flagging where this could be a risk, but it's just like, let's just do it. So it's more to be seen to be being agile rather than actually like doing it and getting under it. And, because it's not easy. Change is not easy. And, but that, what can you do? And then, you're in that kind of scenario where you're like, well, I'm here, I'm going to have to deliver with what we're working with now. But, if I'm completely honest, what you'll tend to see is that you'll get to the end of that work and then you'll end up staying there longer, or having to unpick some other kind of dysfunction that's formed because you haven't potentially done it how you would have, how you've recommended it. But it's all learning as you're going along.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed, and I definitely think legal won't take this out, but I think one of the things that's coming in as a consultant is that businesses try to look at us as a quick patch fix or a quick band-aid that can just, keep the ship afloat. And one of the things that we try and speak to our clients is about, we're very honest with them. It says like culture change and processes change do take time, but at the same time, we're strapped for time because they've only hired us for a certain amount of days or weeks or even months. Now I'm going to switch it up. What would you say to people who want to adapt change? Now, we have listeners as product managers, design leads, design directors, not specifically agile coaches, but there are people who want to bring in change to their organization. What advice would you give to them?
I think, I suppose it's just being really clear about, why do you want this change? Like, have you really thought about it? And can you talk about it clearly? And can you send that message out so everybody can get behind it? Because I tend to see this, but it's just missed all the time. And, even if you haven't, that you aren't going down the exact path that you want, if you've got a really compelling message around why you need to change, like what is the urgency, like what is the risk to the business, to the team, to their jobs, if you can get people behind it and impassioned behind it, then it's going to make the change a lot easier. If you do things, behind closed doors, and then it's just like big bang, hey, we're changing this, people don't like it. They will be resistant, and then you'll get a lot more challenge. And I think, particularly now where, obviously post-COVID, I think people do have a lot of anxiety around their roles and jobs. And, especially in tech, things are changing all the time. We look at the agile coaching market at the moment, it is a bit shocking. And so I suppose it's just having that honesty and transparency, I think, goes a long way, especially if you're remote. You can't see your colleagues every day. You can't see your CTO. Just be honest and compelling in your message. And I think that really can help with the change.
Freya, you just mentioned something just at the end of your statement where I think a lot of people are scared to make change. There's so many layoffs happening left, right, and center. And people are scared to step up to make a difference or to suggest change due to the fact that they put a target over their heads. Now, I know it's a hard question. What would you say to that, to people who want to make a change but don't want to, step up and take the reins in it because of the fact of losing their job? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, isn't it, to think, if unless you're in that position, it's a really difficult one. But I think, for me, I've been through a lot of restructures during my time. And I think, wherever you are in your career, you've got your own values and your own boundaries that you stand for. And, I think when you start to step out of your value zone, and into a sphere where you think, actually, like, this isn't me, I'm acting out of, something that's not in my integrity. So I would say to those people, if you are in that position, where does it sit in your kind of value sphere? And, and if you genuinely believe that this needs to happen, then you have to go for it, but you can do it in a human centric way. And, we all know that change is inevitable. But I think it's how you go about it makes a big difference. And I think that gives, people that have to, initiate change, get that confidence to do it.
No, brilliant. And that answer just really ties into everything. Why I brought Freya on, like, everyone's like, this is a DesignOps podcast. Why are we bringing on somebody about Agile, et cetera, et cetera? I'll give my 2 cents to the audience about this. DesignOps Aligned, which is a consultancy first and the podcast second, we believe that Agile is integral to our day-to-day work. That's one thing. So that's why I brought Freya on about that. And her statement just a second ago should align to anyone in the UX field or the design field. You're there to make a change. You have to stand up and speak for yourself. And nobody's going to like it in that sense if you're trying to change something, but your way of communicating it as a UX designer and as, an advocate of UX core principles and moving away from being a UI executioner comes to what just Freya said. You got to speak up. You have to see the value in what you do, and you need to present that value to many, many people. And so your way of communicating is the one that's going to help you get there. So I'm really glad you said that statement, Freya. And
I know. I'm pleased. I'm pleased that it's funny, Naz, because before I was an Agile coach or Scrum Master, I actually worked in DesignOps myself for a big retailer. So I spent many years working with UX, UI designers and the challenges that they face within organizations, trying to get design and working alongside technology. And, there are a lot of parallels, certainly. But I think the one thing that we have in common is that human-centered approach to our work, but also to us as people. I think, and I think that goes a long way, I think, working in technology and building products.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you mentioned, I think the similarities that I see with an Agile coach or generally with a DesignOps practitioner is the ability to communicate and show value out of the communication or what it is that you want to change. And I think that is the biggest hurdle for anyone in our kind of field, both mine and your fields. It's really convincing, not really convincing, but presenting to people a way of working which then brings value to them as well as value to the business. So
yeah. And I think the tricky thing that I think we also have in common is seeing Agile or UX, UI as a nice to have rather than that is something that is essential. And I remember my time working in DesignOps, and that was such a big thing at the time because, you know, it was like, where did design sit? You know, do we report into tech, or do we report into design, or do we report into product? Who has the final say? And it was like, you know, a product owner could, you know, pick and choose whether they had a researcher or a designer or not. There was no consistency. And it was a really challenging space. And I think, Phil, at the moment, you know, we're kind of in that space at the moment in, you know, kind of the Agile sphere, you know, like, you know, what is the value? You know, do we need them? Do we not? And, you know, I guess what we tend to see, there's always like a big cycle and then we kind of shift back.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. And I think, you know, all we can do, you know, is just keep talking about the value we bring, you know, showing that value and be really data driven and evidence kind of based in our work and our approach so that, you know, people do see that value. But like you say, you've got to be able to communicate and you've got to be able to bring people along with you on that journey.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
I know we're going to go a bit side of topic, but where do you think designers are best placed? Do you find, and obviously there's no right or wrong answer, but I want to get your take. Do you think designers are better placed in a development agile team, or do you think they're better placed inside the service side of the business?
Oh, that's such a good question, Naz. I've seen it all over in all different spheres. I mean, I think the benefits of when, you know, you're I suppose in that kind of product teams, you know, working together is that, you know, you've got that constant communication, you're kind of aligned with each other. I suppose when you go into that service thing, I guess it seems bigger, doesn't it? It seems there's a bit more weight behind it. But I suppose, you know, if we look at anything now, like everything is that it is design needs to lead that. You know, what we're finding now is that, you know, that I suppose we're kind of more technology led, is that we're the need for an ecosystem with design. You know, it's pointless having one team building something and another team and nothing being aligned. And the more companies become more technology led, we're going to see the greater need for that design and that ecosystem. So, you know, maybe it is service led, but I don't know. I've literally, you know, I've seen, you know, design teams put in tech, put into marketing, you know, I don't know which work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've seen them all. I think I just posted about it the other day, actually, like a centralized or decentralized team in general. There is no right or wrong answer. I think what is the right answer is, for my opinion, is the design team need to be positioned in a place where they show the value, you know, and not be, as she say, wireframe executioners. And this is what's happening. And you probably experienced your time in design ops. A lot of product teams are not utilizing designers in the right way because they're just seeing that, hey, we can just give it to the UX team and they just put the polish on the top. It's like, no, you're missing out a big, massive chunk, you know?
Yeah. Or they're working at too granular level. So, you know, you lose that benefit of designers maybe looking at an epic level and, you know, really getting behind that. It's certainly interesting.
Freya, I'm going to say the same question I said to Jack Hughes, who runs the Everyday Agile podcast.
Yeah, good old Jack.
I believe, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, and this is the whole point of this podcast, I believe Agile is not really, okay, let me put my words in the better way. I believe Agile works better with design teams than it does with development teams. Now, before you give your answer, I can see you're already about to.
I like that.
She was just about to jump straight in. I'll give you my 2 cents on this. Now, the Agile Manifesto was written, we're talking now 23 years ago, if that, you know.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
And my theory is that I believe that the Agile Manifesto works well with UX teams is because we can design stuff, test stuff, validate stuff very, very quicker than a development team. And the reason being, I believe that development teams or general product teams do not want to push out half-baked products and then get validation very, very quick. And that's where I think the Agile Manifesto really, really works with design, because we're more situated to testing, validating, and failing quick. Now, what's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's certainly a lot of parallels. I suppose, that whole idea about getting something into the customer's hands and testing that, validating that. And I suppose, I guess what I see with, designers is that they have that curiosity and they have that mindset around, well, okay, it's out there, but we need to keep testing that. Just because it's out in the customer's hands doesn't mean that it's still right. And I suppose that idea around, building and layering things up. And I suppose sometimes with some, product teams, maybe they get too into the technical detail. But I think both of them have that iterative kind of, mindset. Most developers I work with are really, really curious, and, they want to find something out. But I suppose maybe in that designer kind of, researcher kind of mindset, they're more willing to put themselves out there and, put something out. Okay, but whether I like it or not, the customer doesn't like it, the business doesn't like it, and then we're going to evidence base. And I suppose maybe I've seen sometimes that maybe with the tech side that they're like, I like it, we like it, it's going. Yeah. So that's a very broad statement. But yeah, I do. There's lots of parallels in it, and I think it's just around, I suppose just getting teams comfortable with it. I think just because you're, a software team doesn't mean that you're going to like Agile, and just because you're a design team, you might hate it.
Yeah. There's so many pros and cons, and the reason why I make that statement, and I can be, again, I'm not saying I'm right. I just believe that it works so well with UX because of the sole fact that let me not stay in that way. I have seen that product teams do not operate with the MVP mindset. One is because they believe in what they call the MDP, which is the minimum desirable product rather than the minimum viable product. It's like, okay, I want this to be there, or I want all these features to be X, Y, Z, rather than, hey, the minimum viable product is like, you want the user to do X, Y, Z. You don't need A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You just need X, Y, Z. And that's the reason why I kind of make that statement is that product managers want that, additional features on there to be the minimum desirable product. Now, it then ties into what I just mentioned, like designers can test and validate things very, very early, and then they can validate what is the minimum viable product very, very easily. Whereas when it comes to an agile methodology, the terminology with MVP is that businesses get told it gets scrapped very, very easily. And that's why they don't go down the MVP route. It's like, they're just releasing something. This is something just to set them off, but that's going to be scrapped, and we move on to something else to enhance our product. What would you say to businesses or product leads or generally product managers to show the benefits of the MVP mindset?
I mean, I suppose that, like, for me, the whole idea around MVP is that idea that you can pivot or stop if something isn't working. Now, I've worked in large organizations where, they've been in waterfall and they're building something, and it's taken years, it's cost loads and loads of money. They release it and, the market doesn't want it, the business, nobody wants it. So that all that money is wasted. So I suppose the whole idea around the, the MVP, is give it, is kind of de-risking things, and I suppose take confidence in that, but there is value to it. I suppose sometimes maybe like you're describing, there's a bit of a misconception around it. It sounds like what you're suggesting there is that people are spending this time building something, but they know it's just going to get canned, so they're building it. There's no point in building it. I don't know. But if you're just you've got to test and validate things, and I think any product owner or product manager, they need to have that, I suppose, that hypotheses, test-driven mindset, and they need to hold on to that, because that will help them build better products, but also I think work a lot better with their product teams.
Before I move on to my last question, would you say that agile methodologies works better with large scaled software products, or would you say that it works in any aspect of any software development?
I think it can work in any aspect, but it really depends on the organization. It completely depends. If you're part of an organization where you are willing to allow people to adapt and change, and you're willing them to, to give them that space, because, when you're asking people to work in this way, they need some space around it to actually initiate these changes and get into this practice of working, whatever framework they're using. But I see that that doesn't happen very often. But, if you have got that, then yeah, I think it can work. It can work at any level.
Okay. I'm going to hold you to that statement. Definitely.
yeah. But no, it's certainly an interesting one. And I think, obviously I'm working for Infuse Group. We're a digital transformation consultancy. And I think, the one thing that I think that I've taken away from, working with this consultancy is that, we go in and we're really trying to listen and understand the needs of the clients. And we realize that they're always really different. Now, my time when I was an in-house coach, it's a very different story, I think, with a lot of consultants. And I think like what you're describing as well. And I think that, it's really trying to understand what their needs are and how can we best support that in a human-centered way.
Yeah. But that really just ties into my last question, Freya. And I will ask my marketing team to extend our podcast for, and at one point I will negotiate with them. But Freya, I want to get your 2 cents on what do you think businesses value by bringing in an agile mindset? Now, and I know that question is going to be so broad, but I would love to really kind of tailor it on what's the benefits from a design as well as development perspective on bringing in an agile methodology, and what are the benefits you think bringing in those frameworks will bring to businesses and to designers and to developers from your perspective?
And I think if it's done in the right way, like we explained around, having that buy-in, there's a compelling story around it, I think it can be really successful. And I think the main thing is just that things are shifting and adapting so quickly. Organizations, are going bust all the time, and it's quite scary out there. And businesses need to be able to shift and adapt at pace to do that. And they need to be preparing their teams to get into that mindset and into that habit of being able to cope with constant change. But still be able to deliver. So I think that's the value. It's you're preparing your organization, but also your teams for the future, and you're equipping them with how to cope with that. And the iterative nature of many of these agile frameworks, that's exactly what it's doing. It's allowing teams to kind of shift and adapt at pace. And for me, it's when things go wrong, when something, you've got a P1 or something it's gone a bit AWOL, that's when you see the true benefit of Agile and how a team come together and how they can quickly shift and adapt and respond to something. And I think that is crucial. I think a lot of the time we don't talk about that, but I think there's a lot of benefit.
Nice. Freya, it can't be a podcast without speaking about AI. So before we wrap up, I want to get your 2 cents, especially within the agile field and agile coaching field. Where are you seeing AI impact in your industry?
Well, I mean, it's there, isn't it? I mean, I saw someone share on LinkedIn the other day. It was like, I don't know, these group of people sat around a screen having a daily stand-up with an AI bot running it or something. It's a bit weird. I mean, AI's there, I think, but it can help in, many other ways. I've been working with teams where we've been helping, write user stories or, gathering requirements through Chat GPT, for example. But I think, it's not going away. So I just think as a community, we need to, adapt to it. But I think, the one thing that I think that, is not going to impact us is that, essentially, even though I'm working with technology teams and frameworks, essentially what I'm doing is working with people, regardless of their organization. And I think it's that AI can't replace, it's that human connection, being able to work with people. And, that's where I don't think AI will ever be able to replace us.
I never knew about the AI stand-up robot. I'm going to give that one a go.
I'll find it and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please send that to me. But I'm going to put my 2 cents. because I'm actually going to get him on the show, to be honest, was that I saw Jira. They done such an amazing thing with their AI. So it's literally the case that they strategically placed it in my workflow. And so I wrote the epic, I wrote the acceptance criteria, wrote everything. And then as I was just about to make stories, they popped up with a little thing where it suggested stories, or suggestions, they called it. And I clicked a button, and I would say 8 out of 10 of those stories that came out were exactly aligned to the description and acceptance criteria. And then when I went to the story, they already had written a bit of the description. Now, obviously, we don't write stories as a UX designer. I hate that. And, I'm totally against that. But the gist of it was there. And even the subtasks were near enough, I would say 8 out of 10 aligned to the description of the user story. So they have really, really done well with their AI integration with Jira. So
I have to take a look at that one.
Take a look at it if you do get a chance.
It's interesting what you say now, because I think, like we were saying earlier around, that idea that it's an extra admin task and things. If AI can replace the things that people don't like doing, then we can focus on the things that we do like doing.
Absolutely.
And maybe people will be a bit more impassioned around, their work, and, we can have those conversations around the customer and the value and research, hey?
Yeah.
Because, we can have the AI doing all those, writing in the tickets and stuff.
No, that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. I was just about to say exactly the same thing for you. I think we're bringing that stuff into Jira where it's cutting down the amount of admin work. I believe now there is going to be much more take into the methodologies of Agile, into Scrum or what have you, whatever framework you have. And I think that's where we're now going to see a change in the market of really people adapting to it, really people seeing the value of it, because all that admin work that comes with bringing in the Agile framework is now being done by AI, and we're now seeing an uplift in, really, like you just mentioned, speaking about the customers. We now have time to discuss about this. We're not there writing epics and use stories, and that's happening also on the UX UI front. UI automation is coming in thick and fast. So now what I am seeing is that a lot of people are now speaking about the value of the UX design rather than the UI design, So I'm going to bring you back on the show. We're going to have a talk about this. So we're definitely going to
we should go and experiment with different AI stuff and then come back and share what we learned.
Oh, absolutely. I would definitely love that. So we'll be in touch again, definitely. Freya, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Always a bright star when I see you on LinkedIn and your posts. I'm glad that you actually gave us the time to be on the show. So really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sasso. My pleasure. It's been lovely chatting with you today.
Oh, excellent. Freya, we'll put up links to your agency and also to your LinkedIn profile on the podcast, and we'll love for people to reach out to you. And my 2 cents to anyone listening to this podcast is that Freya I believe that she has a wealth of knowledge, like most of the guests that come into the show, but she really does have that in-depth knowledge in Agile. And if you see her post, she really does advocate for it. So please reach out to her if you have any kind of questions. I think she'll be more than happy when she does have the time to message you back. We had some good news, said this for the podcast, but we'll wait for another time to talk about that. Freya, definitely, wish you all the best, and we'll definitely bring you back on the show again.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you so much. And we'll chat again soon.